The storm hammered the Texas plains with such fury that Quinton Wheeler barely heard the creak of his root cellar door over the howling wind as he descended the wooden steps with his lantern raised high, expecting to find nothing more than a few sacks of potatoes and some preserves his sister had made last autumn. What he found instead was a woman pressed against the far wall, her dark hair matted with rain and blood, her dress torn at the shoulder, and her green eyes wide with terror that seemed to cut straight through him despite the dim light. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking on the single word. "Please do not turn me away tonight." Quinton stood frozen on the bottom step, his lantern casting shadows that danced across her frightened face. He was a practical man, 32 years old and weathered by Texas sun and hard work, not given to surprises or uninvited guests, especially not ones that appeared in his root cellar during the worst storm Riverside had seen in years. But something in her eyes, some desperate plea that went beyond words, kept him from demanding immediate answers. "You are hurt," he said finally, his voice rough from a day spent calling to cattle through the wind. He took a careful step forward, noting how she flinched despite her obvious need for help. "I am not going to hurt you. Let me see." She shook her head quickly, pressing herself harder against the earthen wall. "They are looking for me. If they find me here, they will kill you too." "Who is looking for you?" Quinton set the lantern on a barrel and raised both hands slowly, showing he held no weapon. Outside, thunder cracked so loudly the jars on the shelves rattled. "And what is your name?" She hesitated, her chest rising and falling rapidly beneath the torn fabric of her once fine traveling dress. Rose Jensen. I was on the stage from San Antonio when they stopped us 10 miles south of here. They killed the driver and the guard. I ran." Her voice broke again, and Quinton saw tears mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. "I have been hiding since yesterday morning. I saw your ranch and thought perhaps your cellar might shield me for just one night." Quinton processed this information quickly. The stage from San Antonio ran through Riverside every Tuesday, which meant she had been out in the elements for over a day, likely without food or water beyond what she could find. The fact that she was still standing spoke to a strength he had to admire. "Come into the house," he said, making his tone as gentle as he could manage. "You need medical attention, food, and dry clothes. Then we can talk about who is after you." Rose shook her head again, more violently this time. "If they see a light, if they see any sign of me, they will burn your ranch to the ground. These men are animals. They have no conscience." "Then we will be careful with the lights," Quinton replied. He descended the final step and walked slowly toward her, moving as he would toward a spooked horse. "But I am not leaving you down here to bleed and freeze. My mother did not raise a son who turns away someone in need, especially not a woman asking for help." Something in his words seemed to reach her because her rigid posture softened slightly. When he was close enough, Quinton could see the gash on her temple more clearly, the blood dried in streaks down the side of her face. Her hands were scraped raw, probably from climbing and hiding in the rough Texas brush. She was shaking, though whether from cold or shock or both, he could not tell. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes." But when she took a step, her legs buckled. Quinton caught her before she hit the ground, his arms going around her waist to steady her. She felt fragile against him, all sharp angles and trembling fear, and something protective surged through his chest that he had not felt since his sister married and moved to her own homestead 3 years prior. "I have you," he said quietly. "I am going to carry you up now. Try not to struggle because these steps are narrow, and we will both end up at the bottom if you do." She nodded against his shoulder, and Quinton lifted her carefully, surprised at how little she weighed despite being a grown woman. He guessed her age at somewhere around 23 or 24, though the ordeal had probably aged her face beyond her years for the moment. He carried her up the steps and into the storm, moving quickly across the muddy yard to his ranch house. Inside, he kicked the door shut and carried her to the main room where a fire still burned low in the hearth. He set her gently on the worn sofa his father had built decades ago and immediately went to stoke the fire higher, adding logs until warmth began to fill the space. "Stay here," he commanded, though she showed no signs of moving. He went to the kitchen and pumped water into a basin, gathering clean cloths and the medical supplies his sister had insisted he keep stocked. When he returned, Rose had curled into herself on the sofa, her eyes tracking his every movement with animal wariness. Quinton pulled a chair close and sat down, dipping a cloth in the water. "This might sting," he warned before beginning to clean the wound on her temple. She hissed at the contact but did not pull away, her jaw clenching tight as he worked. Up close, with better light, he could see she was actually quite beautiful beneath the dirt and blood, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her mouth that suggested she was not usually one to show weakness. "Tell me about these men," he said as he worked, partly to distract her from the pain and partly because he needed to know what kind of trouble had landed on his doorstep. "Why did they attack the stage?" Rose was quiet for a long moment, and Quinton thought she might not answer. Then she said softly, "They were after me specifically. The driver and guard were just in the way." His hand stilled. "Why would outlaws be after you specifically?" "Because I saw something I should not have seen." She met his eyes, and he saw a flash of anger beneath the fear. 3 weeks ago, I was working at the hotel in San Antonio. I clean rooms and serve meals. One of the regular guests, a man named Marcus Tate, he left papers in his room. I thought they were trash, so I was gathering them when I noticed names, dates, amounts of money. It was a ledger detailing bribes to lawmen, politicians, judges. Tate is connected to a gang that runs most of the criminal activity from San Antonio to the New Mexico territory. When he realized the papers were missing, he knew I had them. Quinton absorbed this, his mind working through the implications. "Where are the papers now, hidden?" She touched the torn shoulder of her dress. "I sewed them into the lining. I thought if I could reach the Texas Rangers in Austin, I could give the evidence to someone who might actually do something about it. But Tate found out I had left San Antonio. He sent his men after me." "How many men?" "I saw 4 at the stage, but I think there are more searching the area." Rose shuddered. "The leader, he has a scar from his eye to his jaw. He told the others to find me before I reached Riverside because there is a ranger outpost here." Quinton nodded slowly. There was indeed a small ranger outpost in Riverside, manned by 2 rangers who rotated through on patrol. But the nearest one was likely 30 miles away given the storm and regular patrol schedules. Even if he rode out now to find help, Rose would be alone and vulnerable, and the outlaws might find her before he returned. "You are safe here tonight," he said firmly, returning to cleaning her wounds. "My ranch is set back from the main road, and the storm will keep anyone from searching too thoroughly until morning. Tomorrow we will figure out the best way to get you to the Rangers." "Why are you helping me?" Rose asked suddenly. "You do not know me. I could be lying." "I could bring death to your door." Quinton met her gaze steadily as he finished bandaging her temple. "You asked me not to turn you away tonight. I am a simple rancher, Miss Jensen, but I believe in doing what is right. And leaving a woman to face murderers alone is about as far from right as a man can get." Something shifted in her expression, the fear receding slightly to make room for something that might have been gratitude or maybe just surprise that a stranger would show her kindness when the world had recently shown her only violence. "Thank you," she whispered. Now let me see your hands, Quinton said, and she extended them slowly. The scrapes were deep in places, embedded with dirt and debris. He cleaned them as gently as he could, aware of every small gasp and flinch she made. When he finished, he stood and moved to the kitchen again, this time returning with a plate of cold beef, bread, and an apple. "It is not much, but you need to eat," he said, setting it on her lap. "When did you last have food?" "Day before yesterday, I think. On the stage before they stopped us." She picked up the bread with shaking hands and bit into it, chewing slowly as though her jaw hurt. Quinton suspected she had taken more blows than just the one to her temple. While she ate, he moved to the windows, checking the storm outside and seeing nothing but rain and darkness. His ranch consisted of 200 acres of decent grazing land, a small herd of cattle, some horses, and this house his father had built when Quinton was just a boy. His parents were both gone now, taken by fever 5 years back, and his sister visited when she could. But mostly he lived alone with his work and his thoughts. Having a woman in his house, especially one as lovely as Rose Jensen despite her current state, felt strange and unsettling in ways he could not quite name. "You should sleep," he said, turning back to her. "You look ready to collapse." "I am afraid to sleep," she admitted, the bread forgotten in her hands. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the driver falling. I hear the gunshot." Quinton understood nightmares. He had his own from the war years, though he tried not to dwell on them. He pulled a blanket from the chest by the wall and draped it over her shoulders. "You are safe here. I will keep watch tonight. Sleep if you can." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and curled up on the sofa, pulling the blanket tight around herself. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her, and her breathing evened into sleep. Quinton settled into his father's old chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap, and watched the storm rage outside his windows while Rose Jensen slept fitfully on his sofa. He thought about Marcus Tate and his men, about the kind of evil that would kill innocent people over some papers, about the courage it must have taken for Rose to run and keep running despite everything. Morning came slowly, the storm finally breaking into a gray drizzle that turned the yard into a sea of mud. Quinton had dozed in his chair but snapped awake at first light, his hand automatically going to his rifle before he remembered where he was and why. Rose still slept on the sofa, though she had kicked off the blanket in the night, and her dress had dried into stiff, uncomfortable-looking folds. He moved quietly to the kitchen and started coffee, then began frying bacon and eggs. The smell of food woke Rose, and she sat up quickly, disoriented until she saw him and memory clearly returned. "Morning," Quinton said. "How do you feel?" "Sore," she admitted, touching the bandage on her temple gingerly. "But better. Thank you for letting me sleep. You needed it." He plated the food and brought it to her, along with a steaming mug of coffee. "After you eat, I have some clothes that might fit you. They belong to my sister. She left some things here when she married." Rose accepted the plate gratefully, and this time she ate with more appetite, the food seeming to restore some color to her pale cheeks. Quinton ate standing by the window, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low and heavy, which might work in their favor if the outlaws were indeed searching the area. "What is your plan?" Rose asked between bites. "The ranger outpost is on the east side of Riverside, about 3 miles from here," Quinton said. "The town itself is closer, maybe 2 miles, but going there would mean more exposure. I think our best option is to ride directly to the outpost, stay off the main roads, and get you to the rangers as quickly as possible." "You do not have to come with me," Rose said quietly. You have already done more than enough. Just point me in the right direction and I will go." Quinton turned from the window to look at her. This woman who had stumbled into his root cellar and turned his quiet life upside down in the space of a single stormy night. "Miss Jensen, I am not sending you out alone when there are men hunting you. We go together or not at all." She held his gaze, and something passed between them, some unspoken understanding or perhaps just the beginning of trust. "You can call me Rose," she said softly. "Then you should call me Quinton." He set down his empty plate. "Finish eating. I will get those clothes and saddle 2 horses. We should leave within the hour." The clothes fit Rose well enough, though she had to roll up the sleeves and cuffs. She emerged from the bedroom, wearing a simple brown riding skirt and white blouse that had belonged to Quinton's sister Martha. Her dark hair brushed back and tied with a ribbon she had found. With clean clothes and a night of rest, she looked younger and more vulnerable somehow, but also more determined. "I am ready," she announced. Quinton had saddled his best mare for her and his own gelding for himself. He helped Rose mount, noting how she winced as she settled into the saddle but did not complain. He swung up onto his own horse and pointed east. "Stay close and stay quiet. If we see anyone, we ride hard for the outpost." They set off across his land, following cattle trails and creek beds to avoid the main road. The morning was still gray and damp, the ground soft beneath the horses' hooves. Quinton kept his rifle ready, his eyes constantly moving across the landscape, watching for movement or the telltale flash of sunlight on metal that would signal other riders. They had covered maybe a mile when Rose suddenly gasped and pointed toward a low rise to their south. "There. Do you see them?" Quinton followed her gaze and felt his stomach tighten. 4 riders silhouetted against the cloudy sky, too far away to identify but close enough to be a threat. As he watched, one of them raised his arm and pointed in their direction. "Ride," Quinton commanded, kicking his horse into a gallop. Rose followed, bent low over her mare's neck as they raced across the open ground toward a line of cottonwoods that marked the creek running through his property. Behind them, he could hear shouting and the thunder of pursuing hooves. They crashed through the cottonwoods and splashed across the shallow creek, the horses scrambling up the far bank and into denser brush that might provide some cover. Quinton reined in briefly, listening. The riders were still coming, but the trees and rough terrain had slowed them down. "We cannot outrun them all the way to town," Rose said, her face flushed with exertion and fear. "Your horse is carrying more weight and they will catch us eventually." She was right. Quinton's mind raced through options. They could try to hide, but the outlaws would eventually search every hiding place. They could stand and fight, but 4 against 1 were poor odds even with his rifle. Or they could split up, but he refused to consider leaving Rose alone. "There is an old line shack about half a mile northeast," he said quickly. "My father built it years ago for shelter during roundups. It is stone, defensible. We can fort up there and hold them off until help arrives. How will help arrive if nobody knows we need it? I know these men's type. They will not want to draw attention by shooting up the countryside in broad daylight near town. If we can hold them for even an hour, they might cut their losses and run." It was not much of a plan, but it was all he had. "Come on." They pushed through the brush, the horses breathing hard, and emerged onto higher ground where Quinton could see the line shack in the distance. A small stone structure with a wooden roof and 1 narrow window. It looked sturdy enough, built to withstand weather and possibly the occasional defensive action during the rougher years of settlement. They reached it with perhaps 2 minutes to spare, dismounting quickly and leading the horses inside through the single door. The interior was dim and dusty, smelling of old hay and animal droppings, But the walls were solid and the door was thick wood reinforced with iron straps. Quinton pushed a heavy barrel against the door and moved to the window, checking the approach. The four riders emerged from the trees about 300 yards out, slowing as they saw the shack and realized their quarry had gone to ground. "Stay away from the window," Quinton ordered, levering a round into his rifle chamber. Rose pressed herself against the far wall, her face pale but composed. "Do you know how to shoot?" "My father taught me when I was young," she said. "I am not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at if it is close enough." Quinton pulled his revolver from its holster and handed it to her. "6 shots. Make them count if it comes to that." The riders had stopped about 100 yards out, conferring among themselves. Even at this distance, Quinton could make out the scar one of them wore from eye to jaw, exactly as Rose had described. The leader. The man sat his horse with casual confidence, clearly unconcerned about 2 people trapped in a lined shack against his 4 guns. "Rose Jensen," the scarred man called out, his voice carrying easily across the open ground. "You have led us on quite a chase. Come out now and we will let the rancher live. Stay in there and we burn you both out." Quinton glanced at Rose, saw her jaw set in stubborn refusal and felt a surge of admiration for her courage. "Not a chance," he called back. "You are on my land threatening my guest. The rangers patrol this area regularly. You really want to be here when they show up," the scarred man laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "The rangers are 20 miles north dealing with a Comanche raid. We have all day. But I am not a patient man, so I will give you 5 minutes to send the girl out. After that, things get unpleasant." Quinton pulled back from the window and looked at Rose. "I am sorry I got you into this." "You did not get me into anything," she replied firmly. "I got myself into this, and you are the only person who has tried to help. Whatever happens, thank you for that." The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Quinton watched the outlaws through the narrow window, seeing them dismount and spread out, clearly preparing for an assault. When the 5 minutes were up, the scarred leader called out again. "Last chance, Jensen." When no response came, one of the outlaws raised his rifle and fired. The bullet struck the stone wall near the window with a sharp crack, sending stone chips flying. Quinton returned fire immediately, his shot kicking up dirt near the outlaw's feet and sending the man scrambling for better cover behind a fallen log. For the next 10 minutes, sporadic gunfire echoed across the landscape. The outlaws were testing the defenses, trying to determine how many people were inside and how well armed. Quinton fired only when he had a clear target, conserving his ammunition and trying to make each shot count. He hit one man in the shoulder, sending him cursing back behind the trees, but the others had found good cover and were maintaining steady pressure. "They are going to try to get behind us," Rose said, her voice tight but steady. "That back wall, is there another way in?" "No, this is the only door and window." Quinton reloaded his rifle quickly. "But you are right, they will try to get around to our blind side. Watch that back wall. If you hear anything at all, you shoot." Rose moved to the back of the shack, Quinton's revolver held in both hands, her eyes fixed on the stone wall as if she could see through it. Quinton divided his attention between the window and Rose, trusting her to watch their backs while he kept the outlaws honest at the front. Then he heard it, a scraping sound on the roof. The wooden shingles creaked as someone moved across them, trying to be quiet and failing. Quinton looked up at the ceiling, his rifle useless against a target directly overhead. "They are on the roof," he said quietly. "What do they want with the roof?" Rose asked, but even as she spoke, Quinton smelled smoke. "They are going to smoke us out." He moved quickly to Rose's side and looked up at the ceiling beams. Already he could see wisps of smoke beginning to curl down from the roof where they had set fire to the wooden shingles. The stone walls would not burn, but the wooden roof would, and the smoke would force them out into the open where the outlaws could cut them down easily. "We have to run," Rose said, coughing as the smoke thickened. "Right now, before it gets worse." Quinton's mind raced. Running meant exposing themselves, but staying meant suffocation or burning. Neither option was good. Then he heard something else, something that made hope flare in his chest. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming fast from the direction of town. He risked a glance out the window and saw 6 riders approaching at a gallop, led by a man wearing the distinctive badge and white hat of a Texas Ranger. "Rangers," he said, hardly believing their luck. "The Rangers are here." The outlaws had heard them too. The scarred leader shouted something Quinton could not make out, and suddenly the 4 men were mounting their horses and riding hard to the south, abandoning their attack in the face of superior numbers and legal authority. The Rangers split up, 3 giving chase while the other 3 rode up to the burning line shack. "Come out," the lead ranger called. "The fire is spreading. Get out now." Quinton pushed the barrel away from the door and yanked it open, smoke billowing out as he pulled Rose through. They stumbled away from the shack, both coughing, and the Rangers immediately went to work trying to save the structure with blankets and what water they had in canteens. It was a losing battle, but they managed to keep the fire from spreading to the surrounding grassland. The lead ranger, a tall man in his 40s with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes, approached Quinton and Rose as they caught their breath. "Quinton Wheeler," he said, recognition in his voice. "What in blazes is going on here?" "Ranger Morrison," Quinton replied, grateful to see a familiar face. Henry Morrison had been ranging in this territory for 20 years, a steady and fair man who knew most of the ranchers personally. "This is Rose Jensen. She has information about Marcus Tate's operation in San Antonio. Those men were trying to kill her before she could reach you." Morrison's expression sharpened. "Marcus Tate, we have been after that snake for 5 years. What information?" Rose pulled at the torn shoulder of her dress, now Martha's dress, and began carefully unpicking the seams. From inside the lining, she extracted several folded papers, now slightly damp and smoke-stained but still legible. "A ledger of his bribes and payoffs," she said, handing them to Morrison. "Names, dates, amounts, everything you would need to bring charges." Morrison unfolded the papers and scanned them, his eyes widening. "This is solid evidence. With this, we can arrest half the corrupt officials between here and the border." He looked at Rose with new respect. "You are either very brave or very foolish to have taken these, Miss Jensen." "Maybe both," Rose admitted with a weak smile. "But I could not stand by and do nothing when I knew what he was doing." The 3 rangers who had chased the outlaws returned empty-handed. "They had fresh horses waiting and split up," one reported. "We could track them, but it would take days." Morrison considered this, then shook his head. "Let them run for now. We have what we need right here. These papers will give us leverage to bring in Tate himself, and once he is behind bars, his organization will fall apart." He turned back to Rose. "You will need to come to Austin and testify before a judge. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes," Rose said without hesitation. "I want to see this through." "Good. We will escort you there personally. Make sure you stay safe until the trial." Morrison looked at Quinton. "I imagine we owe you thanks as well, Wheeler. Rose would not have survived without your help." Quinton shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Rose said softly, her green eyes finding his. "You risked your life for a stranger. That is not nothing." Something passed between them in that moment. Something more than gratitude or relief. Something that made Quinton's heart beat faster, despite the smoke and exhaustion. He realized with sudden clarity that he did not want Rose to leave with the Rangers, did not want to watch her ride away to Austin and possibly never see her again. But before he could say anything, Morrison was organizing his men and preparing to ride. "We should get moving. Tate has men all over this territory, and I do not want to give them time to regroup. Miss Jensen, can you ride?" "Yes, I can ride." Rose looked at Quinton, and he saw uncertainty in her expression, as if she too felt the strange connection that had formed between them in less than a day. "Quinton, I do not know how to thank you." "Stay safe," he said, the words feeling inadequate for everything he wanted to say. "See this through and get justice for what happened." She nodded, and then the Rangers were helping her onto a horse and forming up around her protectively. Morrison tipped his hat to Quinton. "We will send word when it is over. And Wheeler, consider that line shack a casualty of war. The Rangers will compensate you for the loss." Then they were riding away, 6 Rangers and 1 brave woman with evidence that would bring down a criminal empire. Quinton stood watching until they disappeared over the horizon, the smoke from his burning line shack curling into the gray sky behind him. The next weeks passed in a strange blur. Quinton threw himself into ranch work, repairing fences and moving cattle, trying not to think about Rose Jensen and her green eyes and the way she had looked at him before riding away. His sister Martha visited and noticed his distraction immediately, pestering him with questions until he finally told her the whole story. "You are in love with her," Martha said bluntly over dinner one evening. She was 28, married to a good man who ran the general store in Riverside, and she had always been able to read Quinton like a book. "I hardly know her," Quinton protested. "She was here for one night. Sometimes that is all it takes." Martha reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You should go to Austin, see how she is doing. She has bigger concerns right now than a rancher from Riverside." But even as he said it, Quinton knew his sister was right. He had thought of little else but Rose for weeks, wondering if she was safe, if the trial had happened, if she was thinking of him at all. 2 days later, a telegram arrived at the Riverside post office addressed to Quinton Wheeler. The postmaster, old Ed Patterson, delivered it personally to the ranch, his eyes bright with curiosity. Quinton opened it with shaking hands. Trial concluded successfully. Marcus Tate and 17 associates convicted. "I am safe and returning to San Antonio. Thank you again for everything. Rose Jensen." Quinton read the telegram 3 times, relief flooding through him that she was safe, disappointment that the message was so brief and final. "Thank you again for everything." It sounded like goodbye. "Well," Martha demanded. She had ridden over with Ed, clearly having heard about the telegram from town gossip. "What does it say?" Quinton handed her the telegram wordlessly. Martha read it and frowned. "That is it. After everything you did for her, she sends a telegram. What did you expect?" Quinton said, more harshly than he intended. "She has her life to get back to and I have mine," but Martha was not giving up so easily. "You saved her life, Quinton. The least she could do is come thank you properly." She paused, then added more gently, "Or maybe she is waiting for you to come to her. Maybe she is as scared and uncertain as you are. Could that be true?" Quinton turned the possibility over in his mind. Rose had been through a terrible ordeal, had testified against dangerous criminals, had probably spent weeks looking over her shoulder waiting for retaliation. Maybe she was simply trying to return to normal life, or maybe she was wondering if what they had felt in those desperate hours was real or just the product of fear and adrenaline. There was only one way to find out. "Watch the ranch for me," Quinton said suddenly, making up his mind. "I am going to San Antonio." Martha's face lit up with triumph. "Finally, some sense from my stubborn brother. When are you leaving? Tomorrow morning. He rode out at dawn, pushing hard but not recklessly, following the main road south through Austin and then to San Antonio. The journey took 3 days, and with each mile, Quinton questioned his decision. What would he say when he found her? What if she did not want to see him? What if she had moved on or never felt the connection he had felt in the first place? San Antonio bustled with activity when he arrived on a warm October afternoon in 1878. The streets crowded with cattle buyers, soldiers from the nearby fort, and all manner of travelers and merchants. Quinton had only been to the city twice before, and felt overwhelmed by the noise and bustle after the quiet of his ranch. He asked directions to the hotel Rose had mentioned working at, and found it near the plaza, a respectable-looking 2-story building with a painted sign reading, Turner Hotel. Quinton tied his horse and stood for a moment gathering his courage, then pushed through the front door. The lobby was clean and well kept, with a desk at the far end where a balding man worked through a stack of papers. Quinton approached, suddenly aware of how dusty and trail-worn he must look. "Excuse me, I am looking for Rose Jensen. I was told she works here." The man looked up, his expression guarded. "Miss Jensen does work here, but she is not available at the moment. Can I take a message?" "No, I need to see her." Quinton hesitated, then added, "My name is Quinton Wheeler. I am the rancher who helped her in Riverside. She sent me a telegram and I wanted to see her to make sure she is all right." Recognition dawned in the man's eyes. "Wheeler. Yes, Rose mentioned you. Wait here." He disappeared through a door behind the desk, and Quinton heard voices, low and urgent. Then the door opened again, and Rose emerged. She looked different than she had in his root cellar, or even riding away with the Rangers. Her dark hair was pinned up neatly, her dress was fresh and proper, and she moved with a confidence that spoke of being on familiar ground. But her eyes, those same green eyes, went wide when she saw him. "Quinton," she breathed. "What are you doing here?" "I got your telegram," he said, suddenly feeling foolish for having ridden 3 days on what might be nothing more than wishful thinking. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." And to say, well, I am not exactly sure what I wanted to say. Rose glanced at the desk manager, who was watching with undisguised interest, then moved quickly to Quinton's side. "Come outside. We can talk in the courtyard." She led him through the lobby and out into a small courtyard garden behind the hotel, shaded by oak trees and fragrant with late-blooming roses. When they were alone, she turned to face him, and Quinton saw that her hands were shaking slightly. "I did not expect you to come," she said quietly. "I thought after the Rangers took me away, that would be the end of it." "So did I," Quinton admitted. "But I could not stop thinking about you, wondering if you were safe, if the trial went well, if maybe what I felt that night in my line shack was not just the situation but something more." Rose's breath caught. "What did you feel?" Quinton took a step closer, his hat in his hands, his heart pounding. "Like I had been waiting my whole life for someone to stumble into my root cellar in a storm. Like one night with you mattered more than the last 10 years I spent alone on my ranch. Like I could not let you go without at least trying to see if you felt it too." Tears welled in Rose's eyes, but she was smiling. "I felt it," she whispered. "I have been trying to convince myself it was not real, that it was just fear and desperation making me imagine something that was not there. But then your face would come to mind and I knew I was lying to myself." "What do we do about it?" Quinton asked, hardly daring to hope. "I do not know," Rose said honestly. "My life is here in San Antonio, my job, my room above the hotel. It is not much, but it is mine. And your life is your ranch in Riverside. We are hours apart. So we figure it out." Quinton reached out and took her hand, feeling the same jolt of connection he had felt when he first touched her in the cellar. I did not ride 3 days just to turn around and ride back. Give me a chance, Rose. Give us a chance to see where this might go. Rose looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her because she nodded slowly. All right, but I cannot leave San Antonio immediately. I need to work to save money. The trial meant I had to miss weeks of wages. I understand. Can I stay in town for a few days? Court you properly, the way I should have from the beginning if we had met under normal circumstances. A real smile broke across Rose's face, transforming her from pretty to genuinely beautiful. I would like that. Very much. Quinton stayed in San Antonio for a week, the longest he had ever been away from his ranch, but worth every moment. He rented a room at a boarding house near the hotel, and spent his days waiting for Rose to finish her shifts, then walking with her through the plaza, or having dinner at small restaurants where they talked for hours. He learned that she was 23, originally from a small town in East Texas, orphaned at 16 and making her own way ever since. She learned that he had wanted to be a teacher when he was young, but had taken over the ranch when his father grew ill. That he loved the land, but sometimes felt the loneliness of it like a weight on his chest. By the end of the week, Quinton knew beyond any doubt that he was in love with Rose Jensen. The question was what to do about it. I have to go back, he told her on his last evening, as they sat on a bench in the plaza watching the sun set over the old mission. The ranch cannot run itself, and I have already imposed on my sister too much. I know. Rose leaned against his shoulder and Quinton put his arm around her, marveling at how natural it felt. What happens now? I want you to come to Riverside, Quinton said. Not immediately if you are not ready, but when you are, come live with me on the ranch, marry me. The words came out in a rush, unplanned but utterly sincere. Rose pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. Quinton, we have only known each other for a matter of weeks. I know. And if you need more time, I will wait. But I know what I want, Rose. I want you with me. I want to build a life together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and know that you chose me, that we chose each other. He took both her hands in his. I am not a wealthy man, but I can provide for you. The ranch is good land with room to grow, and I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy. Tears streamed down Rose's face, but she was smiling through them. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. Quinton felt like his heart might burst. He pulled her close and kissed her for the first time, there on a bench in the San Antonio Plaza, as the sun painted the sky gold and red. Her lips were soft and warm, and she kissed him back with a passion that left him breathless. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly dazed, Rose laughed shakily. I should give notice at the hotel, pack my things. It will take me maybe 2 weeks to settle everything here. I will come back for you, Quinton promised. 2 weeks from today, I will be right here at this bench waiting to take you home. He rode back to Riverside the next morning, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Martha took one look at his face when he returned and immediately started planning a wedding. How much time do we have? She demanded. She is coming in 2 weeks. Can we be ready by then? For my brother to finally find happiness. We will make it work. Martha hugged him tightly. I am so glad you went after her, Quinton. She must be very special. She is, Quinton agreed. She really is. The 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Quinton cleaned the ranch house from top to bottom, made repairs he had been putting off, bought new furniture from Riverside, including a proper bed, to replace his narrow bachelor's cot. Martha organized food and decorations for a wedding, spreading the word to their neighbors and friends. The whole community seemed to be excited about the formerly reclusive rancher finding love. On the agreed day, Quinton rode back to San Antonio with Martha and her husband Thomas, bringing a wagon for Rose's belongings. He found her waiting at the plaza bench, a single trunk beside her and a carpetbag in her hand. She wore a new blue dress that brought out her eyes, and her hair was pinned up with small white flowers. "You came back," she said when she saw him, as if she had doubted despite his promise. "Of course I came back." Quinton dismounted and swept her into his arms, holding her close as relief and joy washed over him. "Did you think I would not?" "I was afraid I had dreamed all of this," Rose admitted against his chest. "That I would wake up, and you would just be a fantasy my mind invented during those desperate days. I am real, and this is real." Quinton pulled back just enough to kiss her thoroughly, not caring that they were in public or that Martha was watching with undisguised delight. "Come home with me, Rose. Come be my wife." They married 3 days later in the small church in Riverside, with Ranger Morrison standing as a witness and half the town crammed into the pews. Rose wore the white dress Martha had worn at her own wedding, altered slightly to fit, and carried wildflowers from the prairie. Quinton wore his best suit, the one he had bought for his parents' funeral and had not worn since, and tried not to let his hands shake as he slipped a simple gold band onto Rose's finger. "I, Quinton Wheeler, take you, Rose Jensen, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to choke him. "I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life." Rose's voice was soft but clear as she made her own vows, her eyes never leaving his face. "I, Rose Jensen, take you, Quinton Wheeler, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, stand by you, and build a life with you that honors the gift of this second chance we have been given." When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Quinton kissed his bride to cheers and applause from their neighbors. Walking back down the aisle with Rose's hand in his, Quinton felt a completeness he had not known he was missing. This woman who had asked him not to turn her away had become the center of his world, and he could not imagine his life without her anymore. The reception was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard with food and drink provided by neighbors who were just happy to celebrate something joyful. Quinton danced with Rose as someone played fiddle, neither of them very skilled but both laughing as they tried to keep time with the music. "Are you happy?" Quinton asked as they spun slowly under the stars. "Happier than I have ever been," Rose replied, her arms around his neck. "Who would have thought that running for my life would lead me to the man I was meant to spend it with? God works in mysterious ways," Martha said, dancing past with Thomas. "Even if those ways include outlaws and burning line shacks." As the night wore on and the guests gradually departed, Quinton and Rose finally found themselves alone in the ranch house that was now their home. Rose looked around the main room at the furniture Quinton had so carefully chosen and arranged, at the curtains Martha had sewn, at the flowers in jars on every surface. "It is perfect," she said softly. "Our home." "Our home," Quinton agreed. He took her hand and led her to their bedroom, both of them suddenly shy despite being married. "Rose, I want you to know that I will never pressure you or rush you. Tonight or any night, we have our whole lives ahead of us." Rose cupped his face in her hands, her green eyes warm with love and trust. "Quinton Wheeler, you saved my life and then gave me a reason to truly live it. I am not afraid of anything when I am with you." He kissed her then, gently at first and then with growing passion as she responded, her fingers threading through his hair. They made love slowly that night, learning each other's bodies with wonder and tenderness, and when they finally fell asleep tangled together, Quinton knew with absolute certainty that he had found his purpose, his home, his everything in the woman who had hidden in his root cellar and asked him not to turn her away. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Rose proved to be a natural rancher's wife, learning to handle horses and help with branding, turning the kitchen garden into a source of vegetables and herbs that she sold at the riverside market. Quinton expanded the herd and the land, buying adjoining parcels when they came available, building their prosperity slowly but surely. Their first child came 2 years after the wedding, a boy they named Daniel after Quinton's father. Rose labored through a long night while Quinton paced outside and Martha attended her, and when he finally heard the baby's cry and Martha called him in, he wept at the sight of Rose holding their son, exhausted but radiant. "He has your eyes," Rose said, smiling up at Quinton. "Blue like the Texas sky." "And your stubbornness, I bet," Quinton replied, kissing her forehead and then carefully touching the baby's tiny hand. "Welcome to the world, Daniel Wheeler. You have a remarkable mother." 2 years later came a daughter they named Sarah, with Rose's dark hair and a temperament as sweet as springtime. Then another boy, Matthew, who arrived screaming his displeasure at the world and did not stop until he was 3 years old. Through it all, Quinton and Rose worked side by side, building not just a ranch but a legacy, teaching their children the value of hard work and honesty and love. Ranger Morrison visited sometimes, bringing news of the wider world. Marcus Tate died in prison after 3 years, shivved by another inmate over a gambling debt. His organization crumbled without him, and the corruption Rose's evidence had exposed led to reforms that made Texas law enforcement stronger and more honest. "You changed history," Morrison told Rose one evening as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard. "Those papers you saved, the testimony you gave, it mattered." "I am glad," Rose said quietly, "but this is what really matters." She gestured to Quinton teaching Daniel how to rope a fence post, to Sarah picking wildflowers, to Matthew digging in the dirt with single-minded determination. "This life we built, this family, this is what I was meant for." Quinton came up the porch steps and sat beside her, his arm going automatically around her shoulders. 15 years of marriage had only deepened their love, weathering them like good leather but never diminishing the fundamental connection they had felt from that first desperate night. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" he asked. "How lucky we are," Rose replied, leaning into his embrace. "How a terrible night turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." "To us," Quinton corrected gently. "The best thing that ever happened to us." Morrison left at sunset, and the Wheeler family went inside for dinner, the children chattering about their day while Rose and Quinton exchanged the quiet looks of two people who knew each other completely and loved what they knew. After dinner, after the children were in bed, Quinton and Rose sat by the fire as they did most evenings, comfortable in the silence or talking about plans for the ranch, about Daniel starting school soon, about whether they should add a room to the house for the growing family. "Do you ever think about that night?" Rose asked suddenly. "When I was hiding in your root cellar?" "Sometimes," Quinton admitted. "I think about how close you came to picking someone else's cellar, how different our lives would be if you had run in another direction." "It was not chance," Rose said firmly. "I truly believe we were meant to find each other. Some force greater than us guided my steps to your door." Quinton kissed her temple, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Then I am grateful to whatever force that was. You are the best thing in my life, Rose Wheeler. You and our children, this ranch, this future we are building together." They sat together until the fire burned low, then went to bed in the room they shared, in the house they had made a home, on the land they were shaping into something lasting. And as Quinton held his wife close and listened to her breathing even out into sleep, he thought about the young woman who had begged him not to turn her away, and the life they had built from that single act of kindness. Time continued its steady march. Daniel grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch, and announced at 12 that he wanted to be a rancher like his father. Sarah showed talent for drawing and painting, covering every surface she could find with images of horses and landscapes. Matthew finally settled into a quieter temperament and revealed a gift for working with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse with his gentle touch. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quinton and Rose took a rare day away from the ranch and rode out to the site where the old line shack had burned. Nothing remained now but a few stones and some scorched earth slowly being reclaimed by grass. They stood together looking at the spot, hands clasped. "Hard to believe this is where it almost ended," Rose said, "where we almost lost everything before we even had it. But we did not lose it." Quinton pulled her close. "We fought for it and we won. And I would do it all again, every moment, if it meant ending up here with you." Rose turned in his arms and kissed him, and Quinton marveled that after 20 years, kissing his wife still felt like coming home. They made love there in the grass, under the wide Texas sky, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from it. More years passed, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure. A drought one year tested them, but the Wheeler Ranch survived when others failed because Quinton and Rose had planned carefully and saved for hard times. A fire threatened the grazing land but was stopped by neighbors who came to help, repaying the many times Quinton had helped them. The children grew into adults, Daniel taking over more of the ranch work, Sarah eventually moving to Austin to study art but coming home often, Matthew becoming known throughout the county for his skill with horses. When Quinton and Rose were in their 50s, their hair graying and their hands rough from decades of work, Daniel married a good woman named Emma from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was held at the Wheeler Ranch, and as Quinton watched his son take his vows, he caught Rose's eye across the crowd and smiled. She smiled back, and in that smile was the whole history of their love, every moment from that desperate night in the root cellar to this joyful day. Daniel and Emma had children of their own, 2 boys and a girl who called Quinton and Rose grandma and grandpa, and filled the ranch house with noise and laughter. Rose proved to be a devoted grandmother, teaching the children to bake and garden and telling them stories about their family history. "Tell us about the night you met Grandpa," the oldest grandson would beg, and Rose would settle into her chair by the fire and begin the story they all loved. "It was a terrible storm," she would say. "The worst Texas had seen in years. I was running for my life, scared and alone, and I found a root cellar on a ranch. I went down those steps not knowing if I would live through the night. And then your grandfather came down with his lantern, and when he saw me, he could have turned me away. He could have saved himself a lot of trouble. But instead, when I said, 'Please do not turn me away tonight,' he chose kindness. He chose love, though neither of us knew it yet, and that choice changed everything." The children would listen with wide eyes, never tiring of the story even though they had heard it dozens of times. And Quinton would sit beside Rose, holding her hand, grateful every single day for the woman who had stumbled into his life and made it infinitely richer. Sarah married a man she met in Austin, an artist like herself, and they settled in the city but visited often with their 2 daughters. Matthew married late but well, to a widow with a young son, and they built a horse ranch adjacent to the Wheeler spread. The family grew and flourished, rooted in the land and in the love that Quinton and Rose had built. As they entered their 60s, both Quinton and Rose slowed down physically, but their minds remained sharp, and their love only deepened. They spent more time on the porch watching sunsets, less time working themselves to exhaustion. Daniel ran the ranch now with efficiency and skill, but he never made a major decision without consulting his father. "You taught me everything I know," Daniel told Quinton one evening. "About ranching, about being a man, about what matters in life." "Your mother taught you just as much," Quinton replied. "Probably more. She is the strongest person I have ever known." When Rose was 63, she fell ill with a fever that lasted 3 weeks. Quinton barely left her bedside, holding her hand and telling her stories about their life together, willing her to fight. The doctor came and went, shaking his head gravely, but Rose was as stubborn as she had always been. She pulled through, thinner and weaker but alive. "You are not getting rid of me that easily," she told Quinton when she was finally well enough to sit up. "We still have years ahead of us, Quinton Wheeler. I plan to be a very old woman, sitting on our porch with you, watching our great-grandchildren play." "Then that is exactly what we will do," Quinton said, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I cannot imagine this life without you, Rose. I still cannot." And they did have more years, good years filled with the quiet joy of a life well lived. They saw their grandchildren grow and start families of their own. They celebrated 50 years of marriage with a party that brought together 3 generations of Wheelers and half the county besides. They grew old together gracefully, their bodies failing but their spirits still strong, still in love after all the years and all the changes. When Quinton was 78 and Rose was 73, they sat on their porch on a warm spring evening watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. The ranch spread out before them, greener and more prosperous than it had ever been, supporting not just them but Daniel's family and Matthew's family, and providing employment for several ranch hands. "You remember the first sunset we watched together?" Rose asked, her hand in Quinton's. "In San Antonio, on that bench in the plaza." "I remember every sunset we have watched together," Quinton replied. "But yes, I remember that one. That was the night I asked you to marry me, the night you said yes and changed my life forever." "You changed my life first," Rose pointed out. "When you chose not to turn me away." "I could never have turned you away." Quinton lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Not then, not ever. You are part of me, Rose. You always have been, from the moment I saw you in that cellar." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the world in twilight colors. Inside the house, they could hear Daniel's family preparing dinner, the sounds of children laughing and dishes clattering. It was a good sound, a sound of life and continuity. "We did all right, did we not?" Rose said softly. "With our life together, we did better than all right." Quinton squeezed her hand. "We built something beautiful, Rose, something that will last long after we are gone. That is no small thing." "No," Rose agreed. "It is not." They watched until the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. And when they finally went inside to join their family for dinner, they did so hand in hand, as they had done everything for more than 50 years together. Quinton Wheeler lived to be 83 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep with Rose beside him. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched with his quiet kindness and steadfast integrity. Daniel spoke about his father's legacy, about the values he had instilled and the example he had set. But it was Rose who spoke last, her voice still clear despite her age. "My husband saved my life before he ever knew me," she said, standing at the front of the church with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren behind her. "He opened his door to a desperate stranger and gave me hope when I had none. But that was just the beginning. For 57 years, he saved me every single day by loving me, by choosing me, by building a life with me that was beyond anything I could have imagined when I was hiding in that root cellar. He was a good man, the best man, and the world is diminished without him. But his legacy lives on in our children. In this community, he served so faithfully, in every person who learned from his example what it means to be truly kind. Rose lived 4 more years after Quinton's death, staying on the ranch surrounded by family. She spent her days tending her garden, teaching her great-grandchildren to bake, and sitting on the porch looking out at the land she and Quinton had built together. She never remarried, never even considered it content in her memories and her family. When Rose Jensen Wheeler passed away at 77, the family buried her beside Quinton on a hill overlooking the ranch. Daniel carved the headstone himself, a simple marker that read, "Together they built a legacy of love." And the ranch continued on, passed down through generations of Wheelers, each one learning the story of how it all began with a woman hiding in a root cellar, and a man who chose not to turn her away. The story became family legend, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we choose kindness for a stranger, when we open our doors and our hearts to someone in need. The root cellar still existed on the Wheeler Ranch, preserved carefully by each generation. Young couples would go down the steps and stand in the dim space, imagining that night when everything began, feeling the weight of history and love that permeated the very earth. It became tradition for Wheeler descendants to take their first dates there, to tell the story of Quinton and Rose, to honor the love that had started in desperation and grown into something that shaped an entire family's destiny. Daniel's youngest grandson, named Quinton after his great-grandfather, eventually took over the ranch in the 20th century. He modernized many aspects of the operation, but kept the house and the root cellar exactly as they had been, understanding that some things were too important to change. On his own wedding day, he took his bride down into the root cellar and told her the story, just as his father had told him, just as his grandfather had told his father. "This is where it all started," he said, holding a lantern just as the first Quinton had done so many years before. "This is where one man's kindness changed the course of a family's history. I want our marriage to honor that legacy, to remember that love is built on choosing each other every day, no matter how hard things get." The legacy of Quinton and Rose Wheeler lived on not just in their descendants, but in the values they embodied. The ranch they built became known for treating workers fairly, for helping neighbors in trouble, for standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. The story of how they met, how they fell in love, how they built a life together from nothing but courage and kindness, inspired others to believe in the power of doing the right thing, of offering help to those who need it, of recognizing that sometimes the most important people in our lives arrive in the most unexpected ways. The Wheeler Ranch prospered through the decades that followed, through economic depressions and wars, through droughts and floods, because it was built on a foundation stronger than stone or steel. It was built on the foundation of two people who found each other when they both needed it most, who chose each other every day after that first night, and who created something beautiful and lasting from the simple act of one person refusing to turn another away in their time of desperate need.